Hey guys, first I just want to say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays to whatever it is that you celebrate, and I want to give a huge shout out to Anthony Armstrong, who is my first patron, who generously donated to me. If any of you are interested in becoming a patron, you can go to patreon.com/SirSpooksALot. It helps me get more of the equipment I need for the channel, and also helps by providing me with more time to dedicate to the channel and ultimately put out more content. So thank you again, Anthony. And thank you to all my listeners who have supported me up to this point. It has been absolutely amazing so far. And here are 3 Christmas horror stories. I've always loved the holidays, especially going out and shopping for others. I'm a girl and I just can't help myself. I just love shopping. And Christmas is a good excuse to do a lot of shopping. I'm 20 years old, and this incident happened just a few weeks ago. I went shopping one evening at my favorite store, Target, and was just casually browsing the aisles. I still had a few people left to buy presents for. I didn't already have anything in mind, so I was just kind of looking around, waiting for the right things to pop out at me. It didn't take me long to notice that a man appeared to be following me around the store. At first I just ignored it and assumed it was a coincidence. But eventually, it just became way too obvious. Every time I would go to another aisle, he would be there, and if I looked over at him, he was always staring at me with this extremely creepy grin. I did my best to ignore him. Although he was a definite creep, I didn't feel threatened in any sort of way. I was in a store full of people. The best he could do was just creep me out a bit. He was the most cliche-looking man, too. Everything about him just screamed creeper. He was probably around 50 years old. He had the creeper mustache and everything. Eventually, he inched his way closer and closer to me. Once he was standing right next to me, blatantly staring at me, I finally turned to him and asked, "Do you need something?" His reply beyond creeped me out even more, if that was even possible. I happen to have blonde hair, and he said, "You would look really good as a redhead," followed by this soft, sickening laugh. I just gave him an obvious look of disgust and immediately started walking away. He continued to follow me anyway. With so many people around, I felt confident, and I straight up told him to stop following me. Once I said that, his smile grew even larger on his face. As cliche as it sounds, it really did send a shiver down my spine. At this point in time, I decided I was done shopping and would just come back another day. The man continued to lurk around me as I was in the checkout line. Once I paid for my items, I looked around as I was exiting the store. To my relief, I didn't see the creeper anywhere around me. I continued looking to my left and right as I walked through the parking lot. There were still a lot of cars around and the parking lot was well lit, so I still felt relatively safe. I put all of my belongings in the trunk of my car and got in. After I backed out of my parking spot, I started driving down the lane, and I kid you not, out of nowhere, the creeper man comes out and dives right in front of my car. He bounced lightly off the right fender of my car that was going no faster than 5 miles per hour. He laid on the ground in the parking lot, screaming and holding his neck. He continued to scream, "Help me! Call 911!" over and over again. I was in absolute shock and horror. I knew he wasn't hurt and the entire thing was a facade, but if I just drove off, there was a possibility of me getting into real trouble. I really didn't want to get out of my car because I was afraid. The man drew the attention of several people in the parking lot, and I saw a woman get out her phone and presumably call 911. Even though I knew this was a setup, I still got out of my car to check on the man. I didn't want to appear guilty or something, so I did what I thought was appropriate in this situation. To make a long story short, the police and emergency services showed up. I wasn't charged or given a ticket or anything because luckily, Target has surveillance cameras in the parking lot. They clearly showed I wasn't being reckless or speeding, and that the man just tripped in front of my car. The man was put on a stretcher and taken away, and the police filled out an incident report with me. You would think the story ended there. Well, it didn't. Unfortunately for me, everything from the incident report, including my name, phone number, and address, was available to the man. Nothing too serious has happened since the incident at Target, but things also haven't been normal. For the past few weeks, I've been getting phone calls where there's been nothing on the other line except heavy breathing. And at night, when I'm at home, I will hear light tapping on my windows. I've never actually seen the man lurking around my home, and half the time I feel like I'm driving myself crazy, but I swear he's been quietly stalking me. I'm constantly on edge and worried things are only going to progress. Just last night, I got another phone call. Again, there was nothing but heavy breathing on the other line. But then, after several seconds, I heard that soft, sickening laugh of his. I hope this isn't only the beginning. So every year, we travel to my grandparents' house to spend the night on Christmas Eve. They live in a rural area, so the kids would always play outside behind their house unless the weather was too bad. When I was about 8, I had one of the worst experiences ever. We were at my grandparents' house, and my cousins and I decided to go play outside. It must have been around 4:30 p.m., as it wasn't quite dark out, but it was getting there fast. Our parents told us not to wander too far from the house. Behind my grandparents' house was a yard around the size of a football field. Beyond that led into a forest. On this particular day, my cousins and I decided to play hide and seek. Being the youngest out of the group, I felt pressured to make sure I wasn't caught easily. I ran as fast as I could through the backyard. It was difficult because the top layer of the snow was like a sheet of ice, and it felt like it was cutting into my shins. I knew that my tracks could easily be followed, so I decided to go hide into the woods. I went as far as I could and began to wait. For the next 15 minutes, I could hear voices in the distance. Once I heard my cousin's voice getting louder, I decided to proceed further into the woods. I kept walking, and before I knew it, it had gotten darker out, and I had no idea where I was. This was back in the late 90s, and I was 8 years old anyway, so I didn't have a cell phone. We could have brought flashlights with us if we were smarter, but I don't think any of us anticipated getting lost in the woods. My only concern at first was just not getting caught by the older kids. I kept walking in the direction that I thought was to my grandparents' house, but honestly, I was lost at this point. The terrain was too difficult to walk through, and I grew tired pretty quickly. I decided to sit down for just a moment and catch my breath. At that moment, I got excited because I began hearing footsteps. I started calling out all of the names of my cousins who were playing along with me, but I didn't get any replies. The footsteps grew closer, and I wasn't sure if my cousins were playing a prank on me, or if I happened to run into a stranger. I decided to start walking again and try to get away from whoever was coming towards me. I started walking as fast as I could, but the faster I moved, the quicker the footsteps were behind me. After about a minute of this, I could tell the person was getting close. I took a moment to look behind me, and my worst fear was confirmed. The person coming after me was tall. I couldn't make out any features, but it looked like the silhouette of a grown man, someone certainly much larger than one of my cousins. I continued running, getting scraped up by all the brush I worked my way through. Just as I was certain he was going to catch me, I heard someone calling my name in the distance. It was my cousin. I yelled back and then heard another voice shouting my name. It turned out to be my dad. I raced in the direction of his voice as quickly as I could. At this point, the person following me took off and decided to give up. I finally made it to my dad and tried telling him what happened. He was angry at me for going so far out into the woods, but he was also relieved to get me back unharmed. If I would have gone in a different direction and didn't end up running into my dad, I have no clue what would have happened. It still makes me feel weird thinking about it to this day. My friend Aaron and I have always had a bit of an odd Christmas tradition. Every Christmas Eve, the two of us travel down to West Virginia to go camping. Obviously, it's pretty cold out during this time of year, but we make sure we are prepared. But just like all of our camping endeavors, we bring the bare minimum. When it's warm outside, there's been times we have gone camping with nothing more than a flint and a knife, but given that it's freezing out, we brought a few extra items. We decided we needed a tent instead of building our own shelter. We also brought a few small food items and made sure we had enough layers of clothing. Lastly, we brought just enough kindling to get a fire started. From there, once it's already burning, we could use some of the other wood we could find to keep it going. We recognized that it was a bit of an odd tradition, but we loved it. We looked forward to it every year. It challenged us in ways that typical camping during the warmer months didn't. The Christmas Eve of 2014, we packed up like normal and got ready to depart from Aaron's house. The drive down was unremarkable. It was long, mostly boring, but we got there fine. The area we camp at is really in the middle of nowhere. We get to this tiny town that looks like it's straight out of a movie, and then drive up this dirt road for close to 8 miles. There's a couple small campsites where we go, but there's no plumbing or electricity or anything. Even during the summer months, we are almost always the only people there. And every December when we go, we've never seen another soul up there. That was until December 2014. We had left later in the day than originally planned on, so it was getting dark by the time we got to our campsite, and in December, it gets dark quick. We did manage to get set up fast though. I got the fire started while Aaron began setting up the tent. Once the fire was going strong, I helped Aaron finish up with the tent, and from there, we quickly put together the rest of the odds and ends and finally sat down to relax. We were exhausted at this point, so we decided to eat and then get some rest. We were planning on fishing the next day, which was one of the big points of the trip. After hanging out for a while after eating, we decided to go lay down in our tent. I fell asleep quickly due to the exhaustion I had from all the driving and setting up the camp. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep for, but I was eventually woken up by a rustling noise. I laid completely still, trying to determine what the source of the noise was. It sounded like someone, or something, was going through our belongings. We weren't dumb enough to leave any food out, but I still knew it was possible it was a bear or some other type of animal. I shook Aaron awake. At first he gave me a confused, annoyed look, but once he heard the noise, he knew just why I woke him up. I motioned to him to stay quiet by putting my index finger over my lips. Minutes seemed like hours, but I would estimate 2 or 3 minutes went by, and then everything went quiet. At that point, Aaron and I assumed that it must have been an animal and they finally moved on. Just as soon as I was about to relax again, I heard a rustling noise just outside of the tent. Aaron looked at me and we both shared a look of fear. The tent began to slowly unzip, and that's when the real fear set in. I quickly and quietly began looking through my items for my knife but wasn't able to locate it. Aaron slowly stood up and I did the same. Luckily, since it was so cold, we were both still dressed. I couldn't find my knife but grabbed my keys. During this, the tent continued to unzip. As soon as it was most of the way unzipped, the flap fell open. There was an older man staring there that looked as surprised to see us as we were him. Aaron made the first move and ran directly into the man, knocking him backwards onto his ass. I followed suit and the two of us ran to my car. I'm not sure whether or not the man pursued us because we had a good head start on him. We got in my car and drove off. We didn't know whether or not the man was armed and we didn't want to find out. We contacted the police and were escorted back to the campground in the morning to collect our items. Everything of value, which luckily was very little, was gone. Everything else was torn apart and tossed in the fire. This man, whoever he was obviously deranged and violent. If he hadn't have woken me up, I have no clue what he would have done to Aaron and I. I'm just glad we got out of there unharmed. That was the last time we camped at that particular spot. Okay guys, I want to thank you again. If you got to this point of the story and you listened to the whole thing, thank you even that much more. I am working on another creepypasta, which will be done very, very soon. I wanted to release this because of the holidays, but there will be another creepypasta by none other than Matthew N. that will be out very soon. Thank you so much, guys, and happy holidays.